Sunday. It is August 29th. It is 11:14 a.m. in the morning. And on this Sunday episode, I would like to go back through time and talk about my first astral projection experience. Afterwards, I'd like to say a few things about what I have learned. And by the way, I know I have done a previous episode on my first experience, but I know that not everyone obviously has listened to all of my videos. And sometimes I like to talk about it for those who are just starting, so that you know that you aren't the only ones that have fear, for those of you who are afraid. So let me get right into my first experience. Now, when I first learned about astral projection in the late 70s, I had just moved to Southern California from Chicago, and I had no idea what it was until a friend of mine, a childhood friend, had told me about it. We were talking in his house, which was, it's an older house, and it wasn't very clean, actually, this place that my childhood friend lived in. And we were just talking, when you're young, you talk about all kinds of things, I think. And I don't know how many of you can identify with this, but you have those conversations about spirits or hauntings or things like that when you're little, the experiences that you may have had up to that point. And my friend started talking about astral projection. And when he first told me about it, I honestly thought that he was making it up. I mean, I listened to what he had to say. I was a little kid. I was 9 years old. But even back then, I think I was a little bit too, a little bit more practical than I should have been for being that age. Being that I believed in Santa Claus and believed in, the tooth fairy still, but this astral projection stuff just seemed to be out there to me. But I listened because I thought it was so cool. I thought, oh my gosh, being able to fly and go to all these different places, I thought that would be a really cool thing. But also, it was interesting because there was a part of me, as I listened to my childhood friend tell me about these things, there was a part of me that was kind of taking it in, and some aspect of me did kind of believe that it was possible, but most of me was like, I don't think so. So that night, after we had talked, of course, it kind of stayed with me, but way, way in the back of my mind. And once I went to bed, I wasn't thinking about it that night. I mean, I turned on talk radio. For those of you who may have lived in Northern California at one time, you may have heard of KGO News Talk Radio. That's what I loved listening to when I was a kid. I know it sounds very strange, but yeah, a 9-year-old kid listening to talk radio. But because I was an only child, it kept me company in a way to hear the voices. I didn't really have others at that time to really talk to, other than my mother, of course. So I would listen to talk radio at night, and it always made me feel comfortable. So I'd done the usual thing that night. And when I first started feeling, I guess what some would call the vibrations, I don't know. The first thing I felt was a tingling sensation. And this tingling sensation was throughout my entire body. And it hit between that space, between being asleep and awake. And maybe some of you are thinking, well, then why did it happen? All right. So you're laying down, you're going to sleep. Why did this thing begin? Well, in my mind, I had thought about it for just a moment. I think I had thought about it, and I thought about it in that place between being asleep and awake. And my friend had told me, you should do this. You should, picture yourself in a bubble of white light, and that would help you to leave your body. So I pictured that, I think, for a flash, like for a second. And the second I did that, that's when I began to feel the tingling sensation. And when I say tingling, if you've ever felt the static electricity after, let's say, you did your drying and you didn't put a fabric softener or bounce in the drying machine, and your clothes are all staticky, right? When you're peeling them off, or when you scrape your feet, I think when it's cold or whatever, you can shock someone. That's what it felt like. It felt like static electricity, and it was almost this sense that it was crackling, and it was all over my body, and the intensity just kept rising. It kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger until I felt myself lighter than air, guys, lighter than air. And I remember through this entire process, as I began to rise up in the air, I was still in disbelief. I was still like, no, this is not happening. No, I am not leaving my body. This can't be real. That's what I was thinking. This cannot be real. And it was like, I think at first it was like a deer in the headlights. That feeling of shock, like, what in the world is going on? And I kept rising. I kept rising higher and higher into the air, and at one point, I hit the ceiling. I bumped up against the ceiling. Thank goodness. By the way, side note here. Thank goodness I didn't go through the ceiling, because that would have opened up a whole other can of worms for me. Going into the sky and continuing upwards. I have a feeling actually to this day that my guides had prevented me from going through the ceiling, because they probably knew that I would have freaked out even more at this point. But anyway, once I hit the ceiling, I turned. And when I turned, I flipped. That's a better adjective. I flipped in the air. And I flipped so that I started flailing my arms like I was drowning, and I was screaming. And I will always remember, the screaming felt like it was muffled when I was doing it, but I was screaming, and oh my gosh, I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? But at one point, and again, I should also tell you that this was all done in darkness. I did not open my eyes in the astral. I was too scared. This was all feelings. These were all sensations that I had while this was going on. At one point, I stopped. And I remember I just floated there in the air, and suddenly this powerful force just yanked me back into my body, and I opened my eyes and I looked around and I was like, oh my gosh, that was my first experience, guys. And since that time, at first I was still kind of in disbelief, thinking it was like a dream or something like that, but things kept happening consistently, and the same feelings kept happening, and I started having experiences where I would see certain things on the outside. I was flying over the ocean in the Bay Area, and I saw certain things, and then when I would be out in my car with my mother driving around, I would see those things. Things started making me think that this stuff was really happening. So yeah, that was my first experience. And as time went on, I became more and more accustomed to it until it started to kind of become a part of, my whole thing, but part of who I was. Really, honestly, leaving my body occasionally was just the thing that I did, and it was a lot of fun. But I also want to take a moment to talk about what I've learned since that time, the lessons that I've learned since, and hopefully maybe these lessons can assist you in some way. That the lack of intense focus on leaving my body is what assisted me in that first experience. Yeah, I wasn't focused on it. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't obsessed with it. Like I've seen sometimes with people on Reddit, people become so obsessed with leaving their body, and I wasn't. And that probably contributed to why I was able to leave my body that first time. It's because I wasn't so focused on it. I've learned that fear is a part of me, not something to be fought against or defeated. It is a constant companion, and it can be reasoned with and convinced to simply come along for the ride. Fear is one of those things I know that a lot of people deal with, and I always say that regardless of what I say at this moment, it won't necessarily take the fear away. People fear entities coming along and doing things or other types of things that they may have heard on the internet. The only thing I can really tell those people is that in the 40 plus years I've done it, I have never been harmed by anything. I'm perfectly fine. So, again, that may not convince those of you who out there who are afraid, but I'm just telling you that this is the case for me. And it's been interesting, my evolution. At first, I thought it was just the most amazing thing to fly, walk through walls, travel through the power of thought, and explore this world through the astral plane. But what I've come to learn is that this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. There are other worlds, other realities, and these places are beyond what I could ever have imagined. The contrast from exploring my bedroom to being taken to parallel universes so alien to ours that even the tone of the inhabitants' voices are completely different. It has taught me that there are no limits. So, how does all this help you? Well, for those that have begun this journey to leave your body, I hope that it inspires you to continue. There are so many things to see, trust me when I tell you this. There are, I believe, an infinite number of places that you could never, ever finish visiting. It could never end. And by the way, for those that are simply curious and that may be on my channel that are just listening to this because they're curious about the astral plane and astral projection, my hope is that this might help you to see the world around you in a different way. Thank you so much for coming on another journey with me. And until next time, take care.